The girl who once swore she would marry no one but me ran away from our wedding. She chose her high school sweetheart, Merrick, leaving me standing alone at the altar. As I stood there in total humiliation, Tessa Vanderbilt stepped in. She was a high society heiress who had supposedly crushed on me for 7 years. She saved the day by becoming my bride. For 3 years, our marriage was a dream. We were the picture of domestic bliss, or so I thought. Everything changed at the New Year's Winter Gala. Tessa won a prize for a poem she had written. Our friends were all cheering and teasing her about her literary talent. I went to collect her prize from the organizers. That was when I overheard a staff member talking to her. "This acrostic poem you wrote. The first letters spell out Merrick. You must really love your husband," the staffer said. Tessa's gaze was softer than I had ever seen it. "Yes, I love him more than life itself." That night, I broke into the private study she always kept locked. Inside were tens of thousands of photos of Merrick. They were arranged chronologically, from his teenage years right up until yesterday. Every single one was dated. I read the journals she kept near those photos. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I realized her only goal in marrying me was to clear every obstacle for Merrick. She used my influence to protect him. I gave up on us completely. I pulled out my old racing suit, the one I had retired just for her. The Copperhead Ridge rally was only 3 days away. I decided to use it to stage a grand exit. When my car plunges off that 10,000-foot cliff, I will finally be free. The night was thick and heavy. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of our mountain villa. Below, the lights of the Winter Gala stretched out like a glowing sea. My former racing manager, Xavier, was shouting through the phone in disbelief. "Killian, are you serious? You're actually coming back? You aren't messing with me, right? You're a world-class driver. You're a goddamn legend for Team Hurricane. You belong on the track." I gave a calm, short answer. "I'm entering the rally in 3 days." Xavier was ecstatic. He started rambling about engine specs and tire modifications. Suddenly, a tipsy voice drifted from behind me. "What about tires? Honey, are you thinking about getting a new car?" My heart skipped a beat. I covered the mic and ended the call with a few quick words. "You're hiding something from me." I tucked the phone away just as Tessa reached me. She wrapped her arms around my waist. It was her habit to bury her head against my neck and nuzzle me. I frowned slightly and gently pushed her back. "You're drunk and hearing things. Go to sleep." "No way. I can't sleep without my husband beside me." I looked down at the woman acting so spoiled in my arms. A sharp pain stabbed at my chest. During our 3 years of marriage, Tessa had been the perfect wife. She took care of every little detail of my life. Our sweet moments often went viral on social media. People envied our love. Whenever she got emotional, she would thank me with teary eyes for letting her stay by my side. I really believed this was what true love looked like. I was a fool. I carried her to the bed. As I tried to pull away, she grabbed my collar. "Honey, why did you sneak back to the city this evening?" "The city is covered in ads for Merrick entering the rally. I was afraid it would upset you. That's why I brought you to the mountains for a vacation." I braced my arms against the mattress to keep some distance between us. The rally was happening on the other side of this very mountain in 3 days. Tessa claimed she brought me here to relax. In reality, she just wanted to be close to Merrick's race. Did she really think I was that blind? Ever since she told me she was terrified of me getting hurt, I had hung up my racing suit. For 3 years, I played the role of a wealthy, idle husband. I didn't ask about the outside world. In Tessa's eyes, I was probably just a useless trophy now. Back then, I retired because she said she was worried about my safety. I thought she cared. Now I know the truth. She was just afraid I would outshine Merrick on the track. After all, Merrick had always been a loser compared to me. "Honey, why aren't you saying anything? Are you thinking about racing again?" I snapped back to reality and looked at her. Tessa's eyes were clear and sharp. There wasn't a hint of drunkenness in them. I stared right back and lied. "No. You love me so much. I could never bear to make you worry." Tessa smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I knew you loved me the most. 3 days from now is the end of the festival. Once I'm done with my errands, we'll fly to Switzerland for skiing. You've been talking about it forever." I gave a low grunt of agreement. My eyes drifted back to the window. "In 3 days, you'll be the only one skiing in Switzerland. I'll be halfway across the world." Tessa became incredibly clingy after her drinks. Once we were settled in bed, she started moving her hands over me. Her warm, smooth leg rubbed against mine, trying to spark a flame. I felt a wave of pure revulsion. In the past, this would have driven me wild. I would have folded into her embrace instantly. But now, I pushed her away with force and got out of bed. Tessa looked stunned. "Honey, what's wrong?" I realized I had reacted too strongly. "Nothing. My throat is dry. I'm going to get some water." I threw on my robe and hurried out of the bedroom. Before the door closed, I caught a glimpse of her eyes. They were cold and indifferent. I opened the living room window to breathe in the freezing air. I needed to kill the irritation in my gut. A phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Tessa's. She usually turned it off at night to avoid being disturbed. I used to think she was just being considerate of my sleep. Now I realize she was just hiding the thirsty texts from Merrick. The notifications were scrolling across the screen. I saw enough. To give Merrick a better shot at winning the rally, she had gifted him a custom carbon fiber Aston Martin. I looked down and let out a bitter laugh. For Merrick, a $5 million car was a casual gift. For Merrick, a custom designer suit was a given. But for me, I hadn't even received a $300 tie in 3 years. I grabbed my own phone and sat on the sofa. I lit a cigarette and opened my message requests. Merrick had been trying to add me for months. I had always ignored him. Tonight, I felt a twisted urge to see what he was posting. I accepted the request. His feed was exactly what I expected. Besides the mansion and the cars, it was all about Tessa. I scrolled through the posts. It finally clicked why Tessa traveled for business, every week. She was taking Merrick on luxury trips all over the country. I was about to close the app when I saw a post of him showing off a mansion. The caption read, "Thank you Ms. Vanderbilt for the gift. I love this Baroque estate." I tapped the photo. My eyes widened as my body went stiff. That house, it was my childhood home. It had been renovated, which was why I didn't recognize it at first. I had lived there for 10 years. When my family's company hit a financial crisis, my mother sold it with tears in her eyes. She planned to buy it back once we recovered, but she died in a car accident shortly after. Before she passed, she begged me to get that house back. It was the only thing her parents had left her. When our company finally got back on its feet, the realtor told me a mysterious tycoon had bought it. I tried everything to contact the owner. I offered anything I had to get it back. I never got a response. Now finding out the truth this way felt like a sick joke. I couldn't tell myself it was a coincidence. Tessa knew. Merrick knew. They both knew what that house meant to me. They did this on purpose to spit on my memories. The pain was so sharp it turned into a dull numbness. I dropped my finished cigarette and collapsed onto the couch. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon. I rubbed my sore neck. I wanted to call Xavier and tell him I was going to scout the track early. But before I could pick up my phone, Tessa walked over. "Morning, honey." She leaned in and pressed her red lips against the corner of my mouth. A second later, she scowled. She looked at the overflowing ashtray on the table. "Honey, why are you smoking again? You promised me you'd quit." She pouted and reached for the pack to throw it away. I grabbed it before she could. "It's nothing. Just a craving." Tessa stood still, her eyes scanning me with an intensity one hadn't noticed before. Seeing my frown, she softened her tone and giggled. "I'm just worried about your health. Go wash up. I'm taking you to the carnival today." She led me to a haunted house attraction at the fair. It was themed like an old Gothic manor. She loved taking me to these places. I once asked her why. She said, "You used to be a racer. I thought you liked the adrenaline." I had told her clearly that I hated these scripted scares. She kept dragging me to them anyway. Last night, I found out why. Merrick was the one who loved haunted houses. Tessa was just practicing on me. Halfway through the attraction, we had to do a solo task. Tessa told me to wait in a safe room, while she went to find a clue. The room was dimly lit. I waited for almost 30 minutes, but she didn't come back. Worried she might have actually gotten hurt, I went to look for her. I walked down a long corridor and heard Merrick's muffled voice. "Tessa baby, aren't you afraid Killian will catch us if you're this bold?" I stopped in my tracks. I looked through a cracked window into one of the prop rooms. Merrick was dressed in an actor's costume, lying back on a velvet prop bed. Tessa's shirt was half undone, revealing her black lace lingerie. There were fresh, dark marks on her pale skin. Hickeys. Blood rushed to my head. I was about to burst in when I heard her laugh. Why would I be scared? That idiot is still waiting in the fake safe room. He has no idea that if no one leaves for 30 minutes, the ceiling is rigged to spray red fluid everywhere. He'll look like a slaughtered pig. They both burst into laughter. Merrick rolled over and pinned her down. The loser probably doesn't even realize the ghost following you guys and scaring him was me. They started making out, clothes and shoes hitting the floor. I stood there, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. My feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. I couldn't move. My brain was spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. I finally understood the wink the ticket seller gave Tessa when we walked in. I understood why a game meant for 6 people started with just the 2 of us. I forced myself to turn around and leave that suffocating place. As I walked away, I heard Merrick panting. I checked with Team Hurricane. Killian is actually entering the rally. You did a great job, baby. Using this vacation to keep him off the track. I want to see how he plans to race without scouted notes or a practice run. I walked straight out of the carnival and hailed a ride to the rally course. The track was closing for prep at 5 p.m. Today was the last chance for a trial run. When I arrived, Xavier rushed over with my racing suit. "It's a 60-mile course. You have 35 minutes before they lock the gates. Your navigator is waiting in the car. Move. I pulled on my gloves and headed for the modified McLaren. I'm on it, I said, my voice steady. The moment I sat in the driver's seat, my eyes stung with tears. Regret and relief fought for space in my heart. I fired up the engine and launched. The car flew forward like a bullet. As I tore through the corners, my life with Tessa flashed before my eyes. I drifted through the tight bends, my navigator barking out notes. 32 minutes. I crossed the finish line. I pulled a sharp 180 and brought the car to a perfect halt. I saw Xavier jumping for joy in the distance. But before he could reach me, Tessa appeared. Her face was a mask of fury. She wasn't the sweet wife anymore. She slapped me hard across the face. Killian, how could you? She stopped herself, breathing hard. I knew what she wanted to say. She was going to give me the same old speech about safety. Merrick's best time was 33 minutes. I had crushed it on my first try. Merrick was standing right behind her, looking arrogant and pissed off. Killian, you think that junk car is going to help you beat me? I pushed my tongue against my swollen cheek and smirked. Only weak drivers blame their gear. For the next 2 days, Tessa stayed home from work. She spent every second trying to brainwash me. Merrick got more aggressive too. He sent me disgusting texts every hour. When I didn't reply, he started sending photos of him and Tessa together. Tessa knew I was polite on the surface, but had a wild streak in my blood. On the day of the race, she locked all the doors. She stood in front of me with her arms out. Killian, if you go out there today, we're through. I won't sit around waiting to become a widow. Looking at her lying face, I felt nothing. No pain. Nothing. I snatched the keys, shoved past her, and drove to the track. By the time Tessa arrived at the scene, I was already flooring it through the first curve. Xavier was screaming from the sidelines. Killian, you maniac. You're going to get yourself killed. You only ran this track once. You don't even have a navigator. Tessa heard him. Her face went bone white. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Killian, she screamed. She gripped the metal railing, her eyes glued to the screen showing my car. She could tell. The way I was driving. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to end it. She prayed for me to come back safe, her mind spinning with fear. Another sharp turn. I drifted at full speed, successfully putting distance between me and a desperate Merrick. The blind spot was 100 yards away. I hit the nitrous. I looked up at the sky and smiled. Suddenly, every camera feed on the track cut to static. When the picture returned, the crowd gasped in horror. A second later, the screaming started. My car had smashed through the guardrail. It was tumbling down the side of the massive cliff. Tessa screamed my name until her voice broke. Tears streamed down her face as she sprinted toward the track like a madwoman. Killian. The sound of the impact did not carry the sharp, metallic crunch of a standard collision. It was a deep, hollow boom that reverberated through the granite walls of the canyon, followed by the terrifyingly wet, sliding sound of heavy machinery tearing through the dirt and pine branches of the cliffside. At the spectator barrier, the silence was instantaneous, heavy and absolute. For 3 seconds, 5,000 people stopped breathing. The giant LED screens, scattered around the rally plaza, flickered with blue static, the telemetry data. For car 17, Killian's McLaren, flatlining into a solid, unmoving zero. Killian. Tessa's voice was a high, broken shriek that did not sound like her at all. She thrust her body against the iron barrier, her knuckles turning white as she tried to scramble over the metal. Beside her, Merrick stood frozen, his helmet still tucked under his arm. His face had gone a strange, pasty shade of gray, his eyes wide and vacant as he stared at the empty space on the track where the guardrail had been sheared. Clean off. Xavier. Where is he? What happened? Tessa screamed, turning around to grab the collar of Xavier's Team Hurricane jacket. She was shaking so violently her earrings rattled against her neck. Call the rescue chopper. Why isn't anyone moving? Xavier slowly removed her hands from his coat. His face was a mask of grim, stoic composure, but there was no panic in his eyes. Only a deep, cold stillness. The rescue team is already descending, Ms. Vanderbilt, Xavier said, his voice flat, devoid of any comfort. But at that speed off the ridge, you should prepare yourself. Tessa let out a choked, desperate sob, her knees giving out beneath her. She collapsed onto the gravel, her expensive designer boots covered in gray dust. Merrick took a half step toward her, his hand reaching out, but he stopped. The eyes of every sponsor, every mechanic, and every camera in the pit lane were locked onto them. The live feed had cut back to the broadcast, but the damage was already done. The crowd had seen Tessa screaming, not for her sweetheart Merrick, who was currently sitting in second place, but for the retired legend she had spent 3 years keeping in the dark. Down in the ravine, a single thick column of black smoke began to rise, curling slowly into the cold mountain air. The descent into the Copperhead Ridge ravine took the rescue crew 22 minutes. Tessa refused to stay in the VIP lounge. She scrambled down the rocky, dirt-slick path herself, her silk blouse torn, her fingers bleeding from grabbing onto the sharp pine branches. She didn't care about the cameras that followed her from a distance, or the whispers of the safety marshals who tried to hold her back. By the time she reached the bottom, the smell of burning rubber and high-octane fuel was suffocating. The McLaren lay at the base of a massive granite boulder. The front end was completely pancaked, the engine block pushed back into the passenger cabin, the frame twisted into a grotesque, blackened knot of carbon fiber. Killian! Tessa screamed, lunging toward the burning wreckage. A safety marshal grabbed her waist, dragging her back. Ms. Vanderbilt, stay back. The fuel tank hasn't fully detonated yet. Let me go. He's in there. Killian. Xavier walked down the path slowly, a pair of fire-resistant gloves tucked under his arm. He approached the lead rescue officer, who was currently using a hydraulic cutter to pry open the driver's side door of the crushed safety cell. The metal groaned, giving way with a loud, sharp pop. The rescue officer reached inside, his flashlight sweeping the interior of the cabin. He froze. He turned to the head marshal, his brow furrowed under his helmet. Captain, we have a problem. Tessa stopped struggling against the marshal's grip. She stared at the officer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What is it? Is he gone? The cabin is empty, the officer reported, his voice clear through his radio. The 5-point safety harness has been cleanly unbuckled. The passenger side door. It was released using the emergency mechanical latch before the vehicle rolled over the edge. Tessa's breath hitched. What do you mean empty? How could he not be in the car? He was driving. We saw him on the screen. Xavier stepped forward, his eyes scanning the crushed frame. Killian was a stunt driver for 3 years before he joined the professional circuit. Ms. Vanderbilt, Xavier said, his voice quiet, almost conversational. At the 100-yard blind spot, the track runs directly along the edge of the old logging path. The drop there is only 10 feet into a thick canopy of dense pine safety netting, the kind the local forestry department uses for avalanche control. He looked at her, a thin, cold smile playing on his lips. A driver of Killian's caliber could lock the steering column, release the harness, and exit the vehicle at 40 miles per hour into the brush without breaking a single bone. The car would continue on its path, hit the guardrail at full speed, and plunge into the ravine. Tessa stared at him, the color completely draining from her face. He jumped? She whispered, her hands shaking. He staged the crash? He didn't just stage the crash, Ms. Vanderbilt, Xavier said, pulling a small, sealed plastic bag from his pocket. Inside was a gold-plated wedding band, the one Killian had worn for 3 years. He left this on the steering column. I believe he wanted to make sure you got it back. The news of Killian's miraculous survival and subsequent disappearance hit the corporate and social circles of high society like a tidal wave. But before Tessa could even begin to search for him, the first of the legal notices arrived. On Thursday morning, as she sat in the empty dining room of her mountain villa, her phone buzzing with hundreds of unread messages, her family's chief legal counsel, Mr. Sterling, walked in. He didn't look like a man who was here to offer condolences. He looked like a man who had just seen his bank accounts emptied. Tessa, he said, setting a thick leather folder on the table. We have a catastrophic situation. Tessa didn't look up from her cold coffee. If this is about the search party, tell them to double the budget. He couldn't have gone far on foot. Killian didn't go on foot, Mr. Sterling said coldly. He left on a private charter from the regional airstrip 30 minutes after the crash. And before he boarded, he executed a series of financial transactions that have effectively paralyzed Vanderbilt Holdings. Tessa's head snapped up. What? 3 years ago, when you married Killian, you signed a joint venture capital agreement, Sterling explained, opening the folder. You used his name, his racing pedigree, and his personal shares in Team Hurricane as collateral to secure a $50 million line of credit from the Swiss Union Bank. You used that money to fund your weekly business trips and, specifically, to purchase the Baroque estate and the custom Aston Martin for Merrick Hayes. He slid a document across the table. Killian's lawyers filed a formal audit request with the Securities and Exchange Commission last night. They submitted 3 years of bank statements showing that you systematically embezzled funds from the joint trust to purchase personal assets for a third-party Merrick. Tessa's hands began to shake. The joint trust. It was a mutual account. I had the right to. You had the right to use the funds for corporate expansion, not to buy luxury estates for your high school sweetheart, Sterling snapped. Because the funds were derived from Killian's personal estate, the bank has frozen all Vanderbilt accounts pending a criminal investigation. Furthermore, the Baroque estate. He paused, a look of grim amusement crossing his face. Killian's lawyers executed a clawback clause. Since the estate was purchased, using embezzled capital, the title has been legally transferred back to Killian's family name. Merrick Hayes is currently being evicted by the local sheriff's department. The falling of the dominoes was brutal and swift. By Friday afternoon, the video of Tessa and Merrick in the haunted house attraction had been leaked to the internet. The clip, showing Tessa in her black lace lingerie, laughing with Merrick while boasting about how her idiot husband was waiting in a rigged safe room, went viral within hours. The contrast between her public persona as the perfect, protective wife and her private malice was too sharp for the public to ignore. The sponsors for Team Hurricane pulled out of their contracts with Merrick Hayes. Within 24 hours, Merrick's mansion was locked, his custom Aston Martin seized by the bank, and his racing license suspended indefinitely pending the investigation into his financial complicity with Tessa's embezzlement. At 9 p.m., Merrick called Tessa from a cheap motel room on the edge of the city. "Tessa, you have to do something," he screamed into the phone, his voice cracking with a frantic, ugly terror. "The police came to my hotel. They're asking about the Aston Martin. They say if I don't return the car or pay the value, I'm going to be charged with receiving stolen property. Bail me out." Tessa sat in the dark living room of her mountain villa, her face pale, her hair unkempt. "I can't bail you out, Merrick," she said, her voice sounding hollow dead. "My accounts are frozen. The bank took my credit cards. My father told me if I don't find Killian and get him to sign the release form, he's going to write me out of the family will." "I don't care about your father," Merrick roared. "What about me? I was the one who was supposed to win the rally. I was the one who was supposed to be the legend. Now I'm ruined because of your stupid husband." "He's not my husband anymore, Merrick," Tessa whispered, staring at the gold wedding band sitting on the table. "Then where is he? Where did the bastard go?" Tessa didn't answer. She hung up the phone and blocked his number. She looked out the window at the dark, silent mountain peaks. For 3 years, she had believed she was the one pulling the strings, the high society heiress, who had successfully manipulated a world-class driver to protect her childhood love. But as she stared into the empty, cold dark of the villa, she realized the truth. Killian had never been her trophy. She had been his passenger. And the moment he decided to step off the ride, she had been left to crash alone. 6 months later, the winter snow had melted from the valleys of Orenburg, replaced by the lush, vibrant green of spring. Tessa stood outside the iron gates of the Baroque estate, the childhood home Killian's mother had sold with tears in her eyes, the home Tessa had bought and gifted to Merrick to spit on Killian's memories. The estate had changed. The gaudy, modern renovations Merrick had installed had been completely stripped away. The classical Baroque architecture had been restored to its original, understated elegance. The gardens were manicured, filled with white roses and lavender, Killian's mother's favorite flowers. Tessa looked thin. Her expensive designer dresses were gone, replaced by a simple worn trench coat. Her name was no longer spoken in the high society columns of Orenburg. She was a pariah, living in a small, rented apartment in the suburbs, working as a low-level consultant to pay off her legal debts. She reached out, her hand resting against the cold iron of the gate. A black modified SUV pulled up the driveway, its engine humming with a smooth, powerful purr. The door opened, and Xavier stepped out. He looked at Tessa, his expression neutral, showing neither anger nor surprise. "Ms. Vanderbilt," Xavier said, nodding politely. "You shouldn't be here. This is private property." "Is he inside, Xavier?" Tessa asked, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with a desperate, lingering hope. I just want to see him. I just want to apologize. I'll sign the divorce papers. I'll sign the financial release. I don't want the money anymore. I just want to hear his voice." Xavier looked at her for a long moment before he stepped aside, pointing toward the balcony of the main house. "He's been here for 3 months, Tessa," Xavier said quietly. Tessa's breath hitched. She looked up. Standing on the stone balcony, a cup of coffee in his hand, was Killian. He was wearing a simple white shirt, his hair slightly messy in the morning breeze. He looked healthy, relaxed, and completely whole. The dark, exhausted circles that had surrounded his eyes for 3 years were gone, replaced by a deep, quiet peace. "Killian," she called out, her voice cracking as she took a step toward the Gotta. "Killian, I'm here." Killian slowly raised his head. His slate-gray eyes swept over the driveway, passing over the iron gates, and, for a fraction of a second, his gaze brushed against her face. But there was no anger in his eyes. There was no pain, no hatred, and no recognition. His gaze passed over her, as if she were nothing more than a shadow, a stray leaf, blown against the iron gate by the wind. He turned around, took a sip of his coffee, and walked back inside the warm, sunlit rooms of his childhood home, closing the glass doors behind him. The click of the lock was silent, but to Tessa, it sounded like a crack of thunder. Tessa fell to her knees on the gravel outside the gate, her hands clutching the iron bars as she sobbed into the cold spring air. She realized, with absolute, crushing clarity, that her punishment was not the financial ruin, the social exile, or the loss of her family's inheritance. Her punishment was his indifference. Killian didn't hate her. He didn't want revenge. He had simply erased her from his life as thoroughly as if she had never existed, leaving her to spend the rest of her days in the shadow of a man who would never look back. Beside her, Xavier climbed back into his SUV, his face calm and composed. "Have a safe trip back to the city, Ms. Vanderbilt," Xavier said, his voice flat. As he pulled the door shut, the vehicle drove up the driveway, the sound of the engine fading into the quiet rustle of the white roses. I stood on the balcony of my restored home, looking out at the green mountains of Orenburg. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of lavender and fresh pine, and the track below was quiet. My phone sat on the wooden table behind me, completely silent. No more frantic texts, no more hidden photos, and no more lies. I took a deep, clear breath, feeling the warm morning sun on my face, and smiled. I was finally free.